We are back at the Gov 2.0 Expo in Washington, D.C., and I am joined by Andrew Hoppin, Chief Information Officer for the New York State Senate. Thank you very much for being with us.
Pleasure.
So first question I have for you, what are some of the tools to transparent and interactive websites?
So we started with a content management system. So push some information, contribute content to. First thing we did are hundreds of content creators and information managers within the Senate to directly publish information to the public.
Right. So that content management system that you're using now, is it Drupal?
It's Drupal. Right? It's open source, which was important to us for two reasons. One, cost savings up front. There are no license fees. But also we wanted to be able to take advantage of the innovation of that platform, the same platform. So when the WhiteHouse.gov develops new functionality that's relevant for them, chances are it's also relevant for us, and we get to take advantage of that innovation, and vice versa, we hope.
Do you feel like that's part of the reason why Drupal seems to be the go-to CMS for government agencies?
Yeah, I think there's a network effect, right? More innovation cycles to it, and therefore everybody who's using it gets the benefit from it. So I don't think that Drupal necessarily was the be-all and end-all code base several years ago when I started working with it in 2004. In fact, it had a lot of challenges, and there were a lot of other competing open source CMSs you could have arguably said were better at a code level, but it had this wonderful community dynamic around it, and it allowed that sort of messy collaborative development process to really work well, and that trajectory over time has meant that investing your time in it as an enterprise, as an institution, has really paid off.
I see. Now you've worked in both the public and the private sector, is that correct? Can you talk about some of the differences in development between those two areas, and web development is what I mean?
Sure. So I think tight feedback loop in the private sector, where if you are building a new, say, web-based startup company, a consumer-facing service, you get data really quickly about whether what you've produced is relevant and interesting and useful. People come or they don't. Advertisers pay or they don't, etc. People buy or they don't. In government, I think, in fact, we've lacked that tight feedback loop. The feedback loops come periodically in election cycles, in the case of elected officials. In some cases, in the executive branch, where a government agency may be providing a service to citizens, they never come in a sort of a legacy process. But that really doesn't get back often in a comprehensive, really sort of data-driven way to decision makers to evaluate what they're doing. Whereas Gov 2.0 allows that data feedback loop to happen, and it's that for many years. And I think that's really exciting to be much more responsive to our stakeholders, who are our citizens.
Right. Now, are there any to working with a legislature? And any sort of lessons? I know you've gone through quite a path with New York State Legislature, and are there any lessons that folks who might be in similar positions to you with their legislature?
Yeah, from an enterprise IT perspective, it's completely unique, I think, because in a sense we have 62 CIOs, we have 62 peers.
Right.
So inherently don't all agree with one another, and in fact have agendas inherently. There are two dominant political parties, and there's a bit of a sense of a zero-sum game where what's good for one may be looked at as being not good for another. So we have incredibly nuanced needs in terms of policy and procedures. You can envision if you had two competing companies within your institution, you needed to provide IT services to those two within one enterprise. It's a challenge as an enterprise IT professional to undertake. So that's one aspect. The other aspect, though, which I think is great, is that each representative in the Senate, each senator, is responsible for 250 to 300,000 New Yorkers, and they are completely focused on serving those 250 to 300,000 people. And so anything we can do to help them do that better, to tighten the feedback loop between those people, and to solve the sort of scalability challenge of 300,000 people being represented in one senator, is immediately and sort of viscerally evident that it's beneficial, whether you're the senator or whether you're one of those constituents. So we have that tight feedback loop, and that's really fun.
So recovery.gov is moving to the cloud, and I believe you've got a bunch of stuff in the cloud as well. Do you think that we're on the precipice of more and more government agencies moving into the cloud? Is that going to move towards?
I mean, I think driven, right? So our bottom line was that we could do development for our public-facing websites that have no sensitive or private information whatsoever faster in the cloud. We can stand up a development server like that. We can stand up a staging server like that. We can do faster load testing out there, right? And our total cost of ownership over the long term to maintain that, even for a high-traffic public-facing website, is much lower. So it's sort of night and day for us. The more nuanced questions come in when we're dealing with internal applications that have privacy and security nuances to them, and where there's going to be a large internal demand in terms of traffic for those systems. Our new CRM system being an example, we have a better, fatter private network pipe than we do public internet pipe right now. So we have several reasons to keep those systems on our private network in our data center. But infrastructure-wise, it's not cost-efficient for us either. Hybrid, where we can have a statewide high-speed network that is, has the gold seal of approval of state, and yet allowing us to take advantage of on-demand computing resources. That doesn't yet exist, and I hope it will, and I hope it's a mixture of public and private purveyors of that sort of service that makes it available.
So, last question I have for you, and I was reading your website. You had a blog post called "A Nonprofit to Help Government Entities," and I was wondering if you could expand on that a little bit. How, theoretically, how would an organization like that help governments?
So we're reinventing each other's wheels up the wazoo. So we're building an open source CRM system right now. We did it because we can save money doing it, and because we can be more responsive to our stakeholders with it, because we'll have our hands on the code. But we also did it because we think it can be reused. There are at least 100 legislatures of significant scale in the United States. They all do the exact same thing that we do. They're all buying their own independent CRM systems, almost without exception proprietary ones that they spend millions of dollars on annually. There's no reason that when we solve what's quite a nuanced use case for a legislative body, that our peers shouldn't be able to take advantage of it. And so we think that reuse of code is really where you'll realize tremendous cost savings in IT, in government, and we really hope that business and vendors become a real enabler of that rather than standing in the way of that. Right now I think that governments are typically having a one-to-one relationship with an IT vendor, and their requirements are not being shared and iterated across governments at different levels, peer governments in different states, for example, but also different levels like city, state, federal. And if we all did that, if we said in aggregate, these are our requirements, so if we do this, the vendor's product will meet all of our needs rather than just meeting one of our needs and then to be redone 100 different times, that's where I think you could potentially see billions to do that really in a comprehensive way. And I think it needs to be a non-governmental entity so that it isn't preferentially looking at the needs of one level of government over another, that could be of all that information and be that sort of middle layer between government entities and their vendors.
Have you seen any traction on that? I mean, it sounds like a fantastic
conversations at the local and the federal level about that right now. It's a great, in the silver lining of a horrendous budget, the political jurisdictions that we deal with, is that we need to find ways to continue to improve government services while saving a lot of money, and that's a great forcing factor for change.
Great. Well, thank you very much for taking some time to speak with us. Really appreciate it.
Pleasure. Thanks for your interest.
We will be back soon with interviews from Gov 2.0 in Washington, D.C.